Welcome to Truth by Billie Beene. Flash update, February 19, 2025, time in Texas, about 3 p.m. So some of the things we'll cover. Oh, and I have a subscribe button in the lower right corner of my screen. Thanks for like, subscribe, and share, and for hitting the like button, which helps my channel to grow. Some of the things we'll cover: a potential for a tsunami in the U.S. West Coast, and another plane accident this morning, the fourth, we understand, in the last week. And President Trump could pull the U.S. military from many NATO nations. President Trump and President Putin agree on some things. And Zelensky out, and Europe rages. So let's get started. So we have been seeing along the West Coast and the Cascadia subduction zone for the last few weeks, increased tremors, swarm of small earthquakes in this area. And I came out a few months ago with new information about underwater volcanoes in the Pacific Ocean that were heating up. And I also included that information I received in the fall of 2020 from God, that magma was rising all over the earth, and that correlates to increased reports by volcanologists and seismic experts on a global basis that many volcanoes are being juiced up by magma rising. And we see that occurring also in the Pacific Ocean, adjacent to the west coast of the U.S. Now, we have this report today from Harold Tobin, director of the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network. And this goes along with what we hear always from seismic experts. And this is what I learned in college in the 1990s when I was doing my Earth studies. These experts will come out and give predictions for this could happen or that could happen. But the golden rule is you always say from now until 50 years out. That's a given. However, you can judge when you're seeing experts come out and give updates and begin talking about certain areas. I interpret that to mean, based on my earth science knowledge, that something is going on in that area. Even though they stick to the company line, it could happen from now until 50 years out. So what Harold Tobin is saying is there's a potential here in the Cascadia subduction zone that extends 700 miles from Canada down to Mexico. He's saying there's a potential here for a 9 magnitude earthquake that would produce a tsunami that would come in, affect Vancouver, Canada, down to California, San Francisco, that could immediately kill 14,000 people and injure up to 100,000 people. So it would impact areas like Washington State, Seattle, Oregon, down to San Francisco, and would definitely be a shaker in terms of earthquake damage for this part of the U.S. So that's coming out. And now EARTHMASTER came out this morning. He's based in California, talking about, yes, tremors and swarms of small earthquakes have been going on in this area and continue. An update on Santorini, that island between Greece and Israel that also has a volcano, Colombo, also warming up. So in the last few hours today, February 19, swarms continue, 3s and 4s. So that's going on. And yes, the Earth is becoming more seismically active. So with regard to this area of the U.S., I put forth, it's good to have a heads up, as I said. When you begin to hear experts coming out and giving updates on a given area, even though they're talking about it happening in the next 50 years, if they're giving updates, it's good to pay attention so we can pray against this. And now we have this. This morning we had another plane crash. This is like the 4th plane crash in the last week. We know a few days ago we had a Delta plane in Toronto, Canada, flip over, lose both of its wings. Miraculously, there were no deaths there. But this morning in Arizona, near Tucson, at the Marana Airport, 2 single-engine planes crashed. And we know so far 2 are dead. That happened just a few hours ago. Now, I will reiterate that Mike from around the world in the last month said, look for increased plane crashes, and he said it isn't safe to fly now. Now, I will add that there are things going on atmospherically with the Earth, and that's impact from the space. And there is, and I have documented in previous videos for the last 2 years, instances where it appeared there were microbursts, sudden downward trajectories of sudden strong wind that impacts planes. That's one. That is correct. Atmospherically, we are seeing changes that would impact planes, but also, as I've put out, especially regarding the recent crash near Washington, D.C., between a U.S. military helicopter and an American Airlines Eagle, and other instances I've put forth, it appears to me that there's a possibility of third-party interference with both planes and ships going on. In other words, a third party taking remote control of both planes and ships. So that's going on. 2 of my neighbors were talking one day, and the first neighbor said, oh, she has a YouTube channel. And my second neighbor said, really? What kind? And the first neighbor said, conspiracy. But we know many conspiracies have been proven to be true. So that's going on. Now we have Judge Napolitano interviewed retired Army Colonel Douglas MacGregor this morning, talking about President Trump and reiterating that President Trump stated Ukraine should not have begun the war. And President Trump about Zelensky, he's a dictator, no elections. And many nations, including Russia and the U.S., are stating that Zelensky is not the legitimate current leader of Ukraine. His elected term ended last May, and he simply outlawed elections. And it's coming out that his approval rating in Ukraine is 4%. Now, it's coming out that President Trump had a person favored, that President Trump favors for the next president of Ukraine. I believe that was the former leader of the Ukraine military that's now a Ukraine ambassador to the UK, Zaluzhny. But it comes out that President Putin favors a previous president, a previous politician in Ukraine who has close ties to Russia. So that's going on. So we see moves on both the part of the U.S. and Russia being made with regard to the government of Ukraine. And Colonel MacGregor puts this forth, that when the U.S. put sanctions on Russia, it cost many U.S. businesses billions of dollars. And Colonel MacGregor believes, and I also believe, that the U.S. will also lift the sanctions against Russia very soon, and as part of these ongoing peace talks between the U.S. and Russia. How Turner puts this out, that Russia came out this morning and made a public announcement that the meetings between President Trump's Secretary of State Marco Rubio and President Putin's Foreign Minister Lavrov and others held yesterday in Saudi Arabia have led to an agreement between the U.S. and Russia, and that is immediate restoration of diplomatic ties. So we're talking about embassies and consulates. So a first move between the U.S. and Russia was to restore diplomatic ties, and it's possible that one of the topics they talked about would have been the lifting of sanctions against Russia. Russia also yesterday said they would welcome back in Russia the use of MasterCard and Visa. So we see a linking of business ties also between the U.S. and Russia. And we have this. Zelensky came out this morning, February 19, and said on social media, President Trump and the U.S. live in a disinformation space. Well, it's coming out. Russia and the U.S. and other nations are putting forth that Zelensky is not the legitimate leader of Ukraine. And this is also being discussed today inside the White House. Zelensky out. And also today being discussed around Washington, D.C., no more U.S. money and weapons to Ukraine, and Zelensky is out. And now we have this. Right. So based on the meetings yesterday between President Trump's Secretary of State and President Putin's Foreign Minister, we have today intel coming out, this is via Hal Turner, that the U.S. is saying to NATO that the U.S. may pull U.S. military out of many NATO nations. And these are the NATO nations that Russia addressed in a letter to NATO in 2021. And these have to do with NATO nations that joined NATO after 1990, after NATO and many U.S. presidents had said to Russia, NATO will not expand toward Russia. But we see since 1990, many new nations have joined NATO, moving toward Russia. Russia puts this forth that they technically would like for these nations that have been added to NATO since 1990 to no longer be members of NATO, barring that. President Trump can take an immediate move to placate and to move toward positive relationship with Russia. So the U.S. could simply immediately withdraw U.S. troops from these NATO nations. The Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Albania, Croatia, Montenegro, North Montenegro, Finland, and Sweden. So that's going on. And now we have this. We have from Dialogue Works and an interview today with Martin Armstrong, globally famous economist, talking about President Trump put the 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada to force Mexico and Canada to take action on the borders with the U.S. And we see Mexico and Canada did each put 10,000 troops along the border with the U.S. to slow down illegals coming into the U.S. Martin Armstrong says, this is a classic move by President Trump based on his art of the deal. Martin Armstrong says we see Europe fragmenting and the European Union, Crouch's language that also reflects my opinion that years ago when the European Union was put in place, I did see that and have come to see that as a deep state move to destroy Europe. And Martin Armstrong also brings this out, that centralizing power in Europe and having these European Union leaders unelected by any people in Europe just is not working. So we have that going on. And we have this. That, the climate change, that was even when I was studying science back in the 1990s. I could see this climate change program was not believable. So that's going on. And I also had put forth, since I started covering 3 years ago Ukraine, that a objective of the deep state was to destroy the economy of Europe, beginning first in Germany, and then also to destroy in the U.S. economy, U.S. culture, and the U.S. military. So Martin Armstrong puts this forth. Yes, Germany's economy has shrank. It isn't just a temporary economic impact, but it is actually contracted 3% because the U.S. under JB and KH blew up the Russian pipeline to Germany that was supplying them cheap energy, the Nord Stream 1. That was destroyed by the U.S. And Germany's economy then immediately contracted because energy costs went up. Now Germany, the politicians of Germany still have Nord Stream 2 pipeline that could simply be turned on and restore cheap energy to Germany, but the politicians of Germany are not interested in the economy of Germany to benefit the German people. No, the current political leaders of Germany answer to their deep state masters. So that's going on. So people of Germany, rise up and unite, as we have seen the people of America do. And we have this, a recent interview with John Heller. He was part of the Carter administration, an economic advisor, talking about in Europe, the polls are down for many of the politicians in Europe, especially in France, for Macron. So that's going on. And we have this. President Trump has made this public statement. Alex Christopherou is reporting. President Trump had a presser yesterday talking about Z. No elections. Z operates like a dictator. Z has an approval rating of 4%. And we see Ukraine has been destroyed, yes, through war. And we see Macron is now backing out of sending peacekeeping French troops to Ukraine. Starmer of the UK is now isolated. And this morning from Hal Turner, we had a former UK leader, Liz Truss, who says the UK is a failed state. We need a new movement in the UK. Make the UK great again. Obviously mimicking Make America Great Again in the U.S. And we have this. The U.S. and Russia move to strengthen ties diplomatically and in business. And we have this from Martin Armstrong talking about BRICS. And BRICS is an economic group, BRICS, that came about among several nations who had been cut out of using the U.S. dollar in the SWIFT system. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, BRICS. An alternative to the U.S. dollar system. And Martin Armstrong, globally famous economist, puts this out, that the BRICS, what came about as a result of sanctions against Russia. Martin Armstrong brings this new information out about Greenland, and says that the U.S. military also has a NORAD location there, and that we've had secret U.S. bases there since the 1960s. So it's logical for Greenland to become a part of the U.S. This concludes my flash. I love you, and I'll see you soon.